reports, including by the BBC, it seems that it's more or less a hoax, or at least a very simplistic misunderstanding of what is a complex problem. And I just reacted to the danger of perpetuating such hoaxes or misunderstandings and simple explanations. So, thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. Thanks a ton.
I went to the California office.
So some of the conversations, I know you're all experts, you all work on these issues, but we did want to make sure that if you all find some of these conversations disturbing, we do have someone on site if you all want to have a conversation with them. Dr. Doria, I think if you could just put your hand up, he's right there at the back of the room. We have quiet spaces designated in case you all want to go and have a conversation. Please reach out to Dr. Doria. If you also just want to reach out to the Lifeline, we have John and Kim here from Lifeline, and they have kindly allowed us to put up their information on the screen. If you want to reach out to someone on the phone and have a conversation through the day, here's the number. It's 1-800-273-8255 talk, or you can always go to their website, which is suicidepreventionlifeline.org. So you've heard a lot about Facebook through the last panel. Our experts talked about some of the work we've done, but we did want to take a few moments to take you all behind the scene as to how we respond when we get such content on our platform. What are our policies? How do we work with experts around the world? We wanted to just give you a quick behind the scenes look before we go into the next session.
Over the course of the 10 years that we've been working with suicide prevention experts on these issues, the core message that we've heard from the very beginning is that when someone is in distress, the most important thing we can do is to connect them with someone who cares about them.
And now, because people are spending so much time online and they're talking more about what's happening for them, it's giving us these opportunities to save lives that never existed before. I have been saying for a long time that technology is our best hope for reducing the burden of suicide on a global scale, and there's no company, there's no business in this world that is doing that more than Facebook. So the reality today is that more and more people are living their lives online. So we have been able to take what the science tells us about mental health, mental wellness, mental illness, and suicide, and help Facebook translate that into products and tools that are saving people's lives.
We've been working with over 100 experts for the 10 years that we've been working on suicide prevention. They help us with the development of our policies. They help us with the actual building of the tools that we have when we respond to a report. They are there every step of the way.
If you see something on your feed from a friend who is posting suicidal thoughts, you can click the little button in the top right corner and you can report that content to us. Our team will then review that content. They can provide resources and help to the person in distress. We provide pointers to helplines, and thanks to the help of over 100 partners, we can do this in many, many places around the world. But also, if someone is in immediate danger, we will alert first responders so that we can get help on the ground.
When one of our trusted partners comes and identifies a crisis out there, the benefit to us is we know that it's real. It's been vetted. We know that it is something that we can send resources to, and we will have impact by doing that.
When a post meets that escalation point or threshold, we step in and we do a further review. And we look for some key indicators such as time, method, intent, and that really gives us a clue that that person is in imminent risk of harming themselves. From that point, we would work with first responders to provide them with enough information that they can locate that person and ensure that they're safe.
When we're trying to identify someone in crisis, when we're trying to help the public, it's often like trying to find a needle in a haystack. And something like this, a way in which we can communicate with our social media partners helps us identify those needles out there and helps us quickly identify people who need our help and need resources.
What matters in cases like this is getting help to people fast, because literally every minute counts. Now, typically a friend or family member needs to report the post in order for our team to review it and be able to get help to the person in distress. What technology can do is proactively detect a post where someone might be expressing thoughts of suicide even before someone reports it to us, which means we can review it faster, we can provide resources faster, and if needed, we can get help on the ground faster. What we've done is build this technology by looking at patterns, whether there are patterns that technology can identify to detect whether someone might be expressing thoughts of suicide in a post or a video or whatever it might be. For example, we found that very often friends and family may leave comments such as, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" So it's using patterns such as this and many others that we've been able to build this technology.
I'm a small little nonprofit that is trying to change the world, and we are doing that now more than ever because of Facebook. That's what gives me hope, is that Facebook is giving us an opportunity to connect with people and to give them things that otherwise never would have even known that there was something that could save them.
What do I hope for the future of these technologies? That we can better empower our community to identify when someone is in distress and report it to us. That our technologies get even faster and better able to detect when someone's in distress and connect them with the resources that we need. And that the number of people that we help increases more quickly.
I know that Antigone said this earlier today when we started out, that we really couldn't do all this work without your expertise, your guidance. So thank you so much for working with us to answer some very, very difficult questions. We are going to now transition to a fireside chat. I'd like to call back on stage Antigone Davis and Dr. Jen Ashton from ABC News. She's the chief medical correspondent, to talk to us about how social media can play a role in healing and life after suicide. Thank you so much.
So we've spent a lot of time this morning talking about suicide prevention, and I think it'd be great to transition a little bit to how families and friends rebuild after loss. You've written about it, a great book. I'm actually listening on Audible, Life After Suicide, and I'd love to just talk to you a little bit about that, if that's good.
Yeah.
So, in the book, as well as in many of your reports that you do, you really talk about the outpouring of support, both at the moments after your husband's death, as well as after the publication of your book. Can you just tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. First of all, amazing stuff that's going on now. I mean, really just incredible. As a doctor that uses social media just in my real life, my personal life, to see something like this that can have that kind of impact on literally a public health scale, and having been on the receiving end of that as an individual is just, I mean, it's kind of like hearing that there's been a cure for cancer. So I think that's incredible, and I'm so excited to be here with everyone today. So let's see. I mean, I guess, Antigone, the first place to start is that when my husband and the father of my two children died by suicide, February 11th, 2017, he was also a doctor. It came out of the blue. It was 18 days after we finalized a very amicable and evolved divorce. He lived right across the street from us. We were texting the day before he died. And it really leveled us. And as anyone who's been touched by suicide, which unfortunately is estimated to be 6 million people a year affected by the suicide death of a close friend or loved one, they know that whether you're have a national media platform like I do, or whether you're just your individual in your community, it becomes the story. And it becomes the story largely on social media because that is how we communicate today. And my family was no different. So I was kind of pushed relatively quickly to put out, to go public on my social media channels because my husband's suicide was unfortunately a national headline and it was leaked to the press. And so my team at ABC News, who was incredibly protective and supportive of me and what my children and I were going through, and my personal publicist said, you have to make a statement. So I put something on my social media channels the next day, less than 24 hours later, and that kind of started it. And then being in shock, as anyone who's been affected by suicide, I really didn't look at it for a long time. Then fast forward to last June when Kate Spade's suicide was a national story, and I was asked to cover it on Good Morning America, not as the chief medical correspondent, that was my criteria, but as just someone who was living through the aftermath. And again, I hadn't spoken about it publicly. George Stephanopoulos and I did a segment about what my family and I had been going through, and the social media response was just, it was another wave of, this time, all positive, staggering, massive outpouring of basically the same concept, which is, thank you for speaking to what we're living with. And I was totally floored by that. You can feel like what you're going through is so solitary and so, you don't want to burden anyone with it. Everyone has their own stuff, pain is part of life. And when, we get heard by only 6 million, I know, when I'm sitting in this kind of arena, that's nothing. But
it's a lot of people.
To hear that kind of outpouring was just blew me away. And it was then that my daughter, who's now 19, said, when I got back to my hotel, because I did the segment in LA, I was there for another event, and I walked into the hotel room, and she, as anyone who deals with teenagers knows, this is literally, right, the only method of communication. I walked into the hotel room, and she went, do you see this? Do you see what people are doing? Do you see what they're saying? And then I was still kind of in shock, and I said, no, I haven't gotten a chance to look at it yet. And she said, so many people are suffering, you have to use your voice. And so then fast forward, I wrote my book, which just came out last week, Life After Suicide, and shared not only our story, but the story of 10 other survivors, and really about how it is possible to experience post-traumatic growth and healing and recovery, but that the community in that, which is in my subtitle, is really essential. It's probably the key component to that healing.
You mentioned your daughter, and I know you had shared with me, and I actually was very moved by a public post that she had done on Facebook.
Yes.
After your husband's death. Why did she feel compelled to post publicly, and what did it offer?
So the background to this is that my daughter, who's my younger child is now 19, she's at boarding school, and in one of their classes, they were talking about the ethics of end-of-life issues, and it segued into a discussion about suicide. And her classmates around the table, and they call it the Harkness method, they have to acknowledge the person's previous comment in their statement, or they're not really, it's not just a free-for-all bunch of non sequitur comments. So as it segued into end-of-life issues, physician-assisted suicide, then suicide in general, some of her classmates said, why would a wealthy successful, smart person ever choose to end their life by suicide.
Did they know her story?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and she became more and more upset around this table, 13 students. You know, it's not like she could slink out the back of the room. She then went to her dorm room, broke down, and immediately took to her Facebook page to write. Her name is Chloe Ashton, by the way, and I'm not even sure if you can see it because I don't even know if she's, but I shared it with Antigone. It was a monologue about mental health issues and sensitivity and societal and cultural sensitivity for mental illness and suicide in particular. And it was the way, to answer your question, that she could process her emotions in a productive way that she felt was doing service to her community and to this issue in broader terms. And it was amazing. It was an incredible piece of writing.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously I read it, and I will say that first of all, it takes a lot of courage, I think, to speak publicly about this particular issue, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I do think that it actually, certainly for me, it was extraordinarily helpful. And so you should pass
so
on
glad. I will.
a huge thank you.
And I'll put
to
it on
her.
my public page later because it's really just it's what we hope this dialogue would sound like, really, at any age.
So that actually brings me sort of to the next question that had popped into my mind as I was reading through all the great work that you're doing. You talk about yourself as a very private person, which I think people will find hard to understand when you have a public persona, but you can explain, and I get it. Mm-hmm. What sort of moved you for a very personal experience, because that's very different than what you might do on TV around health issues, to take a personal experience and come out of that privacy?
I think two things. One is it really did hinge on the social media feedback to when I started to dip my toe into talking about my personal experience. And my hesitancy in doing that was that, as a doctor, I would way more rather be on the end of helping someone heal than in needing to be healed. I would rather be the one helping you than saying, Antigone, I need help. Can I talk to you? So that's kind of in my fiber just as an individual. But the social media response, which is on my Facebook, is on my Twitter, is powerfully on my Instagram, where people are writing, I went through this with my mother, my sister, my boyfriend, my uncle, and they're saying what they're feeling, and they're saying, you helped me by sharing your story. That is so powerful. And the fact that they're being heard, which is something that I can't do on national television, right? I mean, we have a very powerful platform at ABC News and on Good Morning America, and we reach 6 to 10 million people or more just via television. But that's just me delivering a unidirectional message. And on social media, the fact that people were able to share their experiences and say, you inspired me, I don't feel alone, that's that community part of it. And that's what gave me the courage to do it.
That's incredible. I actually, speaking of your amazing kids, now you have an amazing daughter, you also have an amazing son. And your son made a very interesting observation about suicide, death by suicide, and how we talk about it. Tell me.
Yeah, so my son Alex, who's turning 21 in a couple of weeks, and he's at Columbia, so I'm so lucky that I get to kind of have him at arm's length. He said a couple of weeks, I don't think it was even 2 weeks after Rob's death by suicide, and he said to us, to me and Chloe, when the issue of anger came up, which I'm really happy to say has really not been a prominent, even though it's a very common and natural and normal response to losing someone to suicide, and grief in general, has not been a prominent emotion for me and my children, because I will say of this comment that Alex made, which I think reframed and crystallized everything for us, which it was, he said, Dad died from a disease like cancer, and that disease killed him. We wouldn't be angry at someone who dies of cancer. We wouldn't consider that person weak or be resentful to them for dying of cancer. So too, we shouldn't be angry at Dad for losing his battle with an untreated mental illness. And he said that, and it just really framed everything, I think, for the three of us. But as you heard, his words now have been shared with the country in my book, Life After Suicide, but also, on our segments that we did on this. And I think that it speaks to the issue, which I know is the reason we're all here, which is that if we thought of mental illness like we thought of heart disease or cancer, we wouldn't be whispering about it. If someone was in my apartment 2 days after Rob's death, whose husband had died by suicide, I actually delivered their baby, and she said, you're going to feel like you have a scarlet letter on your chest. And when you walk into restaurants, it's going to be the first thing that people think about every time they see you. And that I file under the category of not really helpful to hear. But I know that she wasn't trying to be malicious. She was sharing what she was living through after her husband died from suicide in a small, close-knit community in New Jersey. And I just thought, we wouldn't be saying that if my children's father died of a heart attack or cancer. And so I really feel, you and I have talked about this, that this is the time that we have to make this no different than anything below the neck.
Yeah.
And that's coming from a gynecologist, and my specialty is actually below the belly button. So and if we work our way up, it's all good.
No, I always find it striking and remarkable that we have this separation between mental health and health, as if somehow the part of your brain that controls your feelings is brain controlling your feelings is different than how it controls your movements.
Yeah.
It's a very weird pulling apart of ourselves. So we've talked obviously a little bit about suicide and certainly about stigma. You really are focused on post-traumatic growth.
Yeah.
Tell me what you think has been the greatest opportunity for growth and some of the barriers.
So, first of all, I didn't even know the term post-traumatic growth. Dr. Von Dahlen will probably say, well, we do in psychology because it's been around for a long time. But again, MD is not PhD. And so when I heard the term post-traumatic growth, I literally thought it was just created recently, number one. It's been around since early 90s, developed by two psychologists. And it speaks to the theory that after a trauma or tragedy, that a person can actually move towards a position in life where they have a deeper understanding of themselves, a deeper appreciation for life, more passionate engagement with their life and the way they're living it. Sometimes it involves spiritual change or that kind of element. And again, my daughter had articulated this organically before we had heard that there was a real term for it, when she said very soon after Rob's death that she had this epiphany where she said, I realized that I had two choices now in my life after my father died by suicide. I could let his suicide ruin my life and destroy me, or I could use it to help me become a better person. And she said there was only one option. And she has done that, my son has done that. I definitely feel that I have done that. And when we heard the term post-traumatic growth, which I talk about in the book through my interview, if you will, not really an interview, but my sharing the story of another suicide survivor who runs the TAPS organization for military survivors of suicide, I realized that we had fallen into that, but that potential is there for anyone grieving a loss of a loved one from suicide. And we were having trouble processing that because we couldn't understand why we were feeling that our lives were so much more plugged in, so much more engaged with the things that really matter. And all three of us were struggling to reconcile that because we thought, how can this be? We went through the worst tragedy possible. My children at the ages of 17 and 18 lost their father. I lost their co-parent that I was, you know, as I say, loved deeply, not in love anymore. And he could say the same thing, but we were such committed co-parents. And we found ourselves at this higher level of living where we really feel like we can weed through the crap. We don't get sidetracked by the stuff that doesn't matter, by the minutia, by the fluff, by the, you know, the low level like anger that is so much a part of what a lot of people are dealing with, and for good reason a lot of times. And so when I heard the term, I thought, let's crunch some numbers. 47,000 deaths by suicide roughly every year, which, to put it into medical context, is more people than die of breast cancer.
Yeah, this is the thing I think people don't
No clue, right?
Yeah.
More people than die of breast cancer die of suicide, and 47,000 approaches the number at the peak of the AIDS epidemic of people who died of AIDS, right? And then there's an estimate that for every death by suicide, 135 people are directly affected. So you do that math, it's 6 million people a year. So then I thought, if we've experienced this concept of post-traumatic growth, what could this mean for literally tens of millions of people who are at that fork in the road that Chloe was talking about? And how amazing could it be if all of them, or some of them, or most of them could switch sides to the, I'm going to use this to help me be a better person?
Actually, some of what you've said brings up another concept that you talk about in your book, and you've talked about publicly, which you refer to, and I believe is probably a mental health term, multiple truths. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Don't I sound like a psychologist, Barbara? Multiple truths. Like, so I pay attention when I'm in therapy, and I take notes, but so the concept of multiple truths, which I learned from our therapist, and you know, part of my the voice on my shoulder as I was writing my book was that so many, you know, the statistic which I learned from Dr. Von Dahlen is there's only 500,000 trained mental health professionals in this country, right? So obviously not enough to even, you know, really address the need. So I thought, well, I have a therapist. Thank God for her. She's taught me and my children so much. So again, if I can share that, it would be like a couple of pages of seeing a therapist in my book. So the concept of multiple truths, which I learned pretty soon after Rob's death, after the true shock period wore off, which I would say was about 2 weeks or so, I then learned this concept of multiple truths. And I said to my therapist, I don't understand how in one moment I can be with one person in this situation and be laughing and truly happy, not faking it, but really happy, and then immediately think, wait, well, look what I just went through. I mean, my children just lost their father. My ex-husband just died of suicide. This doesn't make sense. And she said, it doesn't have to make sense. It's this concept of multiple truths where you can be incredibly happy, feel joy, excitement, all positives, or any feeling really, and then at the same time feel grief, pain, sadness, loss, and one feeling does not negate the other. And in, you know, another way of saying that is you don't have to feel guilty for feeling those positive things while you're grieving, because my children and I, or anyone who's lost someone to suicide, will always have that pain, but hopefully we will always have joy and fulfillment, which now we really believe is the best way to honor his spirit.
So tell me just a little bit. I know we're getting close to the end of time, and I'm looking
but
at
you
my
know
cards.
me,
How many
Antigone. When
questions
I see a time clock on live television, I literally will. The last word will cross my lips at the last second. I stay to time, always.
I'm sure your producers love it.
They do. I follow rules.
So really quickly, because we're the last couple of minutes, Tell me a little bit about, we were talking earlier a little bit about where you feel we may be at a transition. You alluded to it in some of the other things you were saying. Just talk about what you think is this transition, and I think it relates...
As a society?
As a society. I think it relates to the Scarlet Letter
Yeah.
that you're
I mean, I think that I truly do believe that the time is now. A star is born. What's going on here today? The fact that suicide nets went up on the George Washington Bridge in December of 2017 after 15 people jumped to their deaths, my ex-husband being one of them. That change, the success of my book, which speaks to how badly we need to have this conversation. What's going on, in some areas in government, medicine, technology, popular culture. Everything is coming to a head, and I think that is cause for celebration, and that is time to step on the gas, because this is not something that we should whisper about anymore or should wear a scarlet letter for anymore. And I think, unfortunately, like cancer, like heart disease, it can affect everyone. So the more attention we can give to it and the more we can show people the potential for post-traumatic growth, and as I say, that there is life after suicide, the better we'll all be. I mean, that's my hope, but that's what I feel.
Yeah, my hope too, and I see it actually.
Yeah.
I see it on
Yeah.
our platform. So
Yeah.
we are basically out of time. We have a few seconds.
Okay.
I just want to thank you very, very much. As a twice survivor of suicide, I cannot tell you,
Thank you.
how much I appreciate the work that you're doing to turn this ship.
Thank you.
So
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
For that very, very, I don't even have words to summarize that conversation, but the one phrase that did stand out for me is that the time is now. We do have copies